Hello. So I know that I'm making this video on a topic that is very sensitive in society, in our culture. It's on death. And so I'm going to request anyone watching this, if death is a word that triggers you, then please take responsibility for your own well-being and do not watch this video or watch it at a time when it does not trigger you. I had to muster up a lot of courage to make this video because I know it's not for everyone's viewing. I know it will probably upset a lot of people. It will be judged, and yet I had I don't know what to call it today, but I had a feeling today that I really want to make this video, and I really feel there's somebody who needs to listen to it. It could be one person, it could be more, I don't know, and I'm going to make it. So the reason I got this feeling was I was doing a workshop for IBA Bank, Indian Banking Association members, and in our Q&A, the topic of death came up, and when I shared my perspective on it, I just felt so liberated because it's something I've held almost as a secret. So very, very few people very close to me, probably actually just my sister, probably knows about this perspective that I have on death. And because I don't even dare say it aloud. And it felt so wonderful to voice it, and it was received well by this group, and that could also be the context and the place in our conversation that this topic came up. But what it did for me was, after that, the entire week, evening, I've just been wanting to get this perspective out there. So what is this perspective on death? It's a perspective of looking at death as if it were not a wrong thing, a bad thing, a sad thing, something to grieve and mourn and cry about. I know it might sound weird to a lot of you because it's not the majority perspective, and minority perspectives sound like that, right? So if you think of a regression curve and there's something that's an outlier, there's one way of looking at an outlier where, it's not going according to the hypothesis, the commonly agreed upon hypothesis, and therefore outlier. And I know that that might happen to me because of sharing this perspective. And yet perspectives are just that. And so I do want to share this. Uh, so one of the things that I remember as a kid, and is when I heard news of somebody dying, when there would be a death, I would actually not feel bad about it. Like, I didn't feel the grief or the sadness or the sorrow. But what I saw around me was everyone saying, oh no, this is such a bad thing. All the adults, right? Going, oh no, this is such a bad thing. This is a sad thing. It's a serious thing. And so I felt very bad and wrong. And I thought something's wrong with me, that I was not feeling bad about this thing called death, that somebody died. And that's what we do when we are not in the majority perspective. We make ourselves wrong. So I made myself wrong, and then I hushed up and I play acted, which means I pretended to feel sad. And I had all these pretense conversations ever since then till now, where if I'm in a group that's mourning somebody's death, I'm like, I just play act along with it. But internally, I'm not feeling bad. And I don't want to see that as a wrongness in me anymore. I just want to see that as something different, a different perspective on death. And I'm not here to justify that perspective at all, at all. Like, each one of us has every right to look at everything that we want to in any way, right? But I just want to share some of, because I have been thinking about this perspective a lot, wondering why is it that I look at death this way, but others don't. And not in the spirit of justification, but just in the spirit of understanding of where it fits into in my brain. I would like to give an analogy here, which is to look at nature, which is where I draw all my inspiration and worldview from. I love plants, as you can see outside, and they're dying every day. Every morning when I go to the garden, there's one plant that's died, one more that's grown. There are tiny plants that are growing up, which I know will die because there's no room and space for them to grow up further. There are plants that I kill. We call them weeds. There are plants that I pull out. I kill, my dog kills. And there's death and life just happening all the time with one another. And there isn't that feeling of wrongness about it. That's the perspective that guides me when I like to look at death. Now, I know as a society, we like to think of death as a sad ending. But my question here is, and it's not a question, it's really just another perspective, is what if it's not a sad ending? What if it's just an ending? And what if we didn't have to gauge the joy, contribution, and beauty that any being's life has been or is to us, whether it's a plant, an animal, or a human being, by virtue of its longevity, like time period? So for example, if you love movies, it's not like a 3-hour movie is better than a 2-hour movie or a 10-minute movie. Some of the best movies we enjoy and appreciate and which contribute to us are short films, 5-minute movies. So just because something is short, it doesn't make it less beautiful, less precious, less of something to celebrate or feel grateful about. Then why is it with life that when a life is short, let's say, a child dies at 2 years old, 5 years old, 20, or a person dies at 60, 70, whatever. Why is it that there's so much significance around the duration, that the more the better? In any case, there's no permanence, right? We all know that. We know there's we've just not been set up for a permanent life. We've all been set up to come and go, come and go, come and go. So the impermanence is anyway built into the equation, and I think most of us get it. But my question here is, why the judgment around the length? And therefore, when this thing that we know, which is life, which anyway, starts and ends, then why give me a minute. Yeah. So then the mourning that seems to be almost a required mourning, that is what I'm here to question, because it's okay if it comes naturally. Mourning can come naturally and that's fine. But I'm talking about the social aspect of it, where even if somebody has died, what you really want to do internally is celebrate his or her life and the contribution that they've been so far, and sort of just say a peaceful bye-bye. Why is there this almost very conditioned need that, no, but I'm supposed to feel bad, otherwise I did not love this person, otherwise I do not care about this person, otherwise I do not value human life, otherwise I'm not being empathetic? Where did all of that come from? Why can't we care, value, appreciate, and really, really love someone and be willing to let them go and be willing to celebrate their death as the end point of the beautiful thing that was their life? So I just wanted to make this quick video and put this perspective out there. Take it if it works for you. Dump it if it doesn't. And if you're one of those persons that I felt guided to make this for, because you already hold this perspective, but you've just been stifling it inside of you like I did all these years, because you felt that if you spoke it aloud, then people would judge you and say that, oh my God, look at this uncaring bitch or uncaring person and heart of stone and all of that, then I just wanted to let you know that maybe that's just their judgment, because I know I don't have a heart of stone. And this is the perspective that I hold about death, and this is the perspective that I hold about life. Before I close this video, just another thing that I wanted to share, which is when I was thinking about, okay, how do I put this across in a way that doesn't trigger and antagonize a whole lot of people? Because death is such a sensitive topic, right? And something, and I'm also a poet, so a poem started coming to me. I did not write it fully, unfortunately, but I'll just share the lines that came, which is that I've lived many years, many times, I've died many times, I've died while living, and I've lived while dying. And once these lines came to me, I just started correlating them with my life, and I realized how true it is. And indeed, I do feel like I've been born many times and I've died many times, and I'll continue to be born. And this depends on who is the I, right? This particular body maybe just once, but yeah, I don't think of myself as the body, and I know there are others who share this perspective as well. So that's the first two lines. The second two lines was really insightful for me in making sense of my own life. So, some of you know that when I was 12 years old, I went through a near death situation, and where I was in a fire accident, a stampede, buried underneath a pile of people, and and I like nearly died, and then there was this little bit of sky that I could see, and I was scrambling over the dead bodies, and this sudden surge of energy and getting out and continuing life, right? So, and very strangely, every time I think, and I've made another video about this earlier, about how in that moment I was completely in the state of flow. There was no unhappiness or anything. It was one of the most actually internally beautiful experiences and memories of my life. Again, it feels like a wrong thing to say it, but that's how it felt. And in that moment when I was in what I would call the jaws of death, and maybe everyone feels differently in the jaws of death, but my feeling and my experience then was feeling fully intensely alive, like, and feeling completely engaged in this adventure called life. And this adventure could have gone either way. It could have ended, which we call death, and it could have continued, which it did. But either way, before that possible ending point, it was there's just this complete surge of life. I was very alive in the jaws of death. And take other examples. Again, something I've made videos about earlier, but there have been times in my life, especially in my late 20s, early 30s, mostly later in 20s, when I was severely depressed and like horrible faces, right? And I can think of so many times there when I've just been sitting alone in the sometimes the daytime, sometimes in the night, where technically I'm alive, but I feel dead, dead, like dead inside in my emotions. Dead, there's no life flowing through me, but medically I'm alive. So that's what I'm calling dying while living, and living while dying. And as I'm speaking, I'm thinking of other ways in which there are people I know and people we all know who sort of live on after they've died. People we hero worship or draw a lot of inspiration from. Like, so some of you have heard of the poet and saint Rumi. I feel he's like alive. Every time I read his works, every time I read something that he's written, or just remember something that he's written which is in my brain, I just feel he's there. It's alive, like he lives on. Or Shakespeare. I feel that way about Shakespeare. Shakespeare lives even though he's dead. So this thing of life and death, living and dying, they aren't absolutes. They seem like so subjective. They seem like, of course, like labels. And then I'm wondering, how come one of them is so charged with right and one is made so wrong? So this little video is just my invitation to whoever has stuck on for this long to revisit the label, the judgments and the charges that we associate with the label of death. And what if death was just a comma in your life if you think of yourself as more than this body, or a full stop in your life if you think of yourself as this body? And what if commas and full stops were not wrong? And what if somebody else who's been a part of your life, a near and dear one, a loved relationship, their death is not a bad thing either? And again, want to give another example here where and again, if you're getting triggered by this, just stop listening. But I had this conversation with someone, and she was okay to have this with me, who recently who lost her grandparents. And it's by the way, I'm not making grieving wrong, but I'm just saying if it's not coming, then you don't have to make yourself wrong if the grief is not coming naturally also. It's not necessary to grieve is all I'm saying. But if I'm also not saying there's anything wrong in grief, okay? So she was just talking about, and she wanted me to talk her through this, which is sort of why I intervened or engaged with her. So again, not saying everyone who's lost a loved one has to do this, but she was talking about this feeling of emptiness and void that her grandparents' death left her with because they brought her up. And the question I asked her was, okay, so there's a void and there's an emptiness. And so what? Like, what's wrong about the void and emptiness? Have you made feeling empty wrong? And her face just lit up because she had already been through the process of recognizing, cherishing the memories, letting the memories live with her, celebrating their life. And now it was not really, it wasn't about them, it was about her and the emptiness in her heart or in her, in her space, in her mind. And when I asked her, we often want emptiness, right? So when we meditate, for example, we like an empty mind. When we downsize our house and cupboards, we want to create more space. So space or emptiness is not a bad thing. And she was like, yeah, it's not a bad thing. And I was like, you could stay with that. Or if you want, you could now fill it up with something else. What would you like to fill it up? And again, her face lit up and she was like, I want to make new friends and I want to, she's looking at building a family. And she was like, I want to fill it up with all of those things. And sort of looking at that creation of that empty space is not a wrong thing, allowed her to give herself the freedom to now go ahead with her life and fill it up with all the beautiful things that she wanted. And that can be new relationships, it can be new work, it can be new meaning, it can be a hobby. Or she can also choose to stay with that, enhanced empty space and just, fill it with maybe self-love. And either way is okay, but it just gave her that permission to move on, saying she didn't necessarily have to keep telling her, I'm supposed to feel bad because I've lost a loved one. And that is really the point that I want to, make sure. So if there's anyone who's sort of feeling captivated here, held captive by the social expectation. And when I'm saying social expectation, it's not people walking to your doorstep and say, hey, you're supposed to feel bad because you lost someone. No, I'm really talking about the internalized version of that in our own heads where, our own mind chatter is saying, I'm supposed to feel bad because XYZ left me or XYZ is no longer on the planet walking in the physical form that I used to interact with. And therefore, so just what if you could just let that chatter go and just stay with whatever the experience is for you. And maybe some of you like me will recognize that you're actually, being wired to see life and death in human beings like you see it in plants and nature, and maybe it's okay with you and you don't have to make yourself wrong for it. So have a good time, and just wanted to put this out there. And yeah, see you on my next video or some other time.